panel is Technology, the Future of Storytelling and the Adjacent Possible. Piers Fawkes from PSFK will moderate with Daniel Cherry, Emily Anadu, Paul Parreira, and Sanja Partalo. Sanja, there you go.
There she is.
Okay. So welcome, please, and thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Good.
Good. How's everyone doing? Good. Good. I know it's the last session. But my name's Piers. I'm the founder, editor-in-chief of PSFK. I want to thank Chick again for inviting me. It's been a great session. I think we should all kind of give Chick a round of applause. What a great event. Thank you. We look forward to next year. Before I start the panel, I wonder if I can get a sense of like who's in the room, who works at an agency, like an ad agency, digital agency. Okay, so we got like 33%. Any freelance creative technologists? Oh, a couple. Okay, a couple. What about VC, investment community? Any of those people in here? And what about brands? Anybody who works at brands, technologies? Okay. So fairly agency heavy. There's obviously a group I've missed, but I can't think of it in my head. So it was really great that Chick asked me to create the final panel and final event. And I thought, okay, what am I going to talk about? What am I going to get a panel to talk about? And I was looking through the agenda and saw all these amazing technology companies and technology people. And I thought, well, what is the bigger picture here? What's happening? What's happening upstream that is influencing technology? You know, we just had the panel earlier talking about VR and when is VR going to come out, become big. There was a gentleman with the tie who said, 10 years ago, you should have seen the internet. I was like, I remember the internet 20 years ago. 10 years ago, I thought it was okay. It worked okay. I started a business on it. So as thinking about, you know, what are the bigger themes that are impacting marketing, storytelling, innovation, I thought about bringing a panel together who can like talk about this from different points of view. Daniel, Emily, Paul, and Sanja are going to come and sit with us, and we're just going to go through some of those points, and hopefully it will kind of nicely wrap up some of the themes of the day and connect some dots. Right. So with me, I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but Daniel Cherry runs marketing and innovation at the Prudential Center. I've known him for a number of years. I've worked at Anomaly, at the New York Cosmos, Diageo as well. Emily Anadu runs partner marketing at Jawbone, the technology company. Before that, we spent time at Zynga. Paul Parreira, Paul runs this amazing content company, very distributed new age model, has a number of clients he keeps telling me that I'm not allowed to mention. Sanja runs strategy at the agency 360i. So you can introduce yourselves a little more better than I do, but maybe we can start by just talking about, you know, tell me a little bit about what you do, and I want to talk a little bit about how marketing is changing, because I think marketing is really what's going to impact a lot of these technologies. And in terms of we talked about your career, how things changed from the time when I first met you,
right,
when the internet was created 10 years ago,
exactly,
to today, and maybe we can all talk about how things are changing, how you see things evolving.
For sure. I'm not going to bore you with bios, but to your point, advertising background, client-side background, entrepreneurial background, so attacked it from multiple sides. Where I am now, to your point, is light years away from where we were when we started. Light years away from where advertising was when we were in our heydays at Crispin or Wyden or when we started Anomaly. And I say that because so much of the conversations in business, or what we consider brand, which is a funny misnomer, that brand becomes the conversation on the tips of everyone's tongues, but the business behind the brands is so much more important these days, and how we leverage technology to drive that business. But completely different. My current role, I manage real estate assets and development, a hockey team, a basketball team, an arena, and basically community development in the entire city. So the Newark redevelopment process and rebranding process of kind of northern New Jersey region. So the way you engage media and partners and technology is completely different than me hiring a big glitzy ad agency to come up with a new campaign for my hockey team, which is what it was 10 years ago.
Great. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about what you're applying and what the types of experiences you're creating. Emily.
Hi. So yes, marketing has changed quite a bit. So my first marketing job was actually working for a confectionery company. So spent a lot of time thinking about slotting fees and how high we were on the shelf at the cash register at like a Walgreens or CVS. But then following business school, ended up working in traditional video games, so Atari, EA Sports, Capcom, working on like Street Fighter and Resident Evil and Mega Man. Then transitioned to Zynga, and now Jawbone. And so for me, all of those lives have been very different in that, the confectionery world was very much retail-driven, placement-driven. Video games definitely much more kind of buzz, pop culture-driven. And so so all about kind of very traditional ad spending. I think definitely back then, even at Capcom, I remember that while Facebook was a thing, we actually built our own, Capcom Unity, like our own community portal where we actually gave out points for blogging and posting media that, could be spent on items, and got that to a point where actually media started looking to Capcom Unity to get news, and that's where we would break things versus us going to news outlets. Then transitioning to Zynga, which felt like a gaming transition, but I think very similar to the last presenter where we were just a hardcore analytics company. So we didn't give a crap what our logo looked like. If someone would click on it, if it was blue with a cat versus red with a dog, we'll take it. Then, shifting over to Jawbone, where much more brand focused, but super, super competitive, and getting to be a very crowded space in terms of wearable technology. So I think we're at a place where we are trying everything, but in an industry where I think the average knowledge of the industry is you're basically an expensive pedometer, is what most people think about us and others.
It'll be interesting in a minute to talk a little bit about the Silicon Valley, New York experience and whether there is a difference in approach in terms of marketing mentality. Paul, tell us a little bit about your work and...
Sure. So I basically work with brands, or my company works with brands, to try to put the right writers and editors to help build the message, usually copy-driven. We've done some video, but mostly what we do is very much copy-driven, where we work on multiple drafts, work with the marketing teams, and work with the product teams to make sure that the language, the messaging is absolutely clear. And so as what you mentioned before, there's a real brand awareness happening, and there's a lot of mergers that are happening within interdepartments, where before a product team and a sales team and a marketing team were all kind of their own little verticals, didn't really communicate that often unless the SVP was around. But now you see a lot more of this merger, of the language being much more succinct, where we'll do product descriptions for somebody. I was mentioning Logitech before, but we'll do a product description, but then we'll also talk to the marketing team about how we're going to, create messaging for that product on a blog post or some sort of advertorial or some sort of feature. So
Great.
that's mostly.
Sonny, your career didn't even start in marketing, so it'd be interesting to see how you think
So I
Sonny-
spent the first half of my career working in politics. I like to say I started it by marketing ideas and people, and then I moved on to marketing services and products. Like Emily, classically trained MBA, very particular lens on what marketing is and what the funnel is and how you capitalize on it. And frankly, that whole schematic of classical marketing has been completely disrupted. And what we do at 360i is work, for the most part, lots of CPG clients who were, trained to think a certain way and are now finding themselves, in a difficult spot trying to navigate disruption to the funnel at its most simple form to these various now new parts of the job, like you talked about. How do you develop the content? How do you scale organizationally? What are the partnerships? How do you execute them? Because the idea of having a specialist agency or agency of record that does everything cool for you, that drives that brand awareness into something more meaningful, that translates it to sales, it just isn't the case anymore. And there's actually lots of parallels to politics as well. I worked on Obama's first campaign where, at the time it was like revolutionary that we use social media. And so it's just, I've been there for the ride, and it's a really interesting, I feel lucky to work in this field because I think there are very few fields that have been as disruptive and disrupted as marketing has been.
Great. So let's talk about the person who's using this technology, the consumer shopper of the future, of now. There's this sort of post-omnichannel person running around, mainly interacting with digital technology and brands through their phone. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the approaches that we see taking place there?
Sure. Having been around a bunch of brands, even in the early days of Jawbone, right? You were there with me at Anomaly, and just seeing how the language changes when technology has to connect with humanity. That to me is the most fascinating part, is how technology humanizes itself and truly understands behavior and hopefully anticipates behavior. When you talk about data, trying to do that. But I'd actually think that language is the most important element of this whole conversation. We talk about big data, smart data, competitive advantage data, but if you can't wrap that up and translate it in a way that's intuitive to your end user through their phone or in that moment, it doesn't really matter because it, in my opinion, it creates a complete disruption to reality. You literally have a computer talking to you, and you recognize that if you're a consumer because programmatic marketing and ads, love it, right? That's just inventory and air.
Yeah.
If you truly want to move the needle, how do you understand how to create human connections in those moments that matter? And language is a very big part of that, and not just technology. And I think that, for me at least, having been on the agency side, and actually 360, I was on my agencies at Diageo, finding ways to talk about your products, finding ways to actually engage culture in a human way. I remember an article you wrote way back in the day about brands without souls, and I referenced that article a lot. Wow. I remember that, I remember that article. And I think that now with technology being so prevalent, brands need to understand what their soul is and how to actually speak to people, and not just assume that the only person in the company is supposed to speak to people is the PR person. But your technology should speak just as humanely as hopefully your PR person does. If it doesn't, I think the brands that get it right, you go, wow, that felt intuitive. No, it just felt like they cared about you as a person, not a consumer or a user.
Interesting. I think it'll be interesting in a second to cover like how the beyond the phone. Obviously, you create experiential situations within the Prudential Center and stuff like that, and see how the phone is then a conduit to further experiences. Emily, the phone is like a satellite to the Jawbone experience. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the importance of just communicating to the modern customer, I think, and user.
Yeah, Jawbone is interesting in that I think looking at the other big 8 million pound gorilla in our space, Fitbit, I'm sure there's some out there in the crowd. We made a product decision that you can't actually see, your progress on the device. You have to look at your phone. And so in many ways, it's been amazing for us because, we get something like over 20 opens of our app a week. So almost, 3 per day, which is like off the charts. Like we have off the charts engagement with our app. But that does mean that I think there are people who honestly just want to see the time and want to see their steps right on, their device who aren't engaging. But I think what that has given us is that, brands in particular, we get a lot of contact from brands who are just interested with connecting with our consumers because we do know a lot about them. So a good example from last year, Lab Series, which is an Estee Lauder men's skincare brand, came to us because they were launching a night cream that, is about, making you look better, with this product, using it, while you're sleeping. So we actually worked with them and created content in the app that we specifically served up to people depending on how much sleep they had received. So for example, because we know how much people are sleeping, we might, like if you only got 5 hours of sleep the night before, you might get a message saying, hey, we see you didn't sleep that well last night. When you're not sleeping, the top layers of your skin aren't getting enough, time to recuperate, and this happens. So it was, a message around, healthy skin in that way. So I think the app for us, is definitely given both ourselves, because we know a lot about people again and can know what to say to them at the right moments, but I think it also has given, brands some interesting opportunities in talking to our customers. But I think like many of the things that are happening in the world today, there's so many options that I feel like almost wearables are becoming like a thing of the day. Like, we must connect with wearables. I think there was actually just an Ad Age article where it talked about like the 5 different things in technology that marketers should think about, and so wearables was named. So I just hope that we don't become a thing that was like a fad for marketers in 2015 and 2016. Everyone is, obsessed with Magic Leap and whatever it is that they're working on in Florida.
Talking about fads, Paul, content marketing and all those sort of things, we're supposed to be doing native advertising.
I was just talking to somebody about what you just mentioned, which is I think people, at least myself, I don't talk to myself here, but really I'm getting much more comfortable with the machines and the products and the brands that I love and some of the products that I use, knowing what I do. Like, I used to be kind of freaked out about that, even with, say, iTunes, which I use, I think they've done a really good job of reading the algorithms of what you're doing on your iTunes, or if you use the health tracker, and then reporting back to you, as you said. I'm getting much more comfortable with that. There was a time where I was like, how did they know I was listening to Harold Budd yesterday? Or how did they know I was listening to Brian Eno? They just gave me this great playlist with all these great Brian Eno songs. I'm getting more comfortable with that. Where before I was a little like creeped out, by it, but I think we're getting now very comfortable doing that.
Yesterday, I think earlier this week, Google launched an email reply service, which is, and I wonder what people's reaction to like the scraping of people's emails to do that.
Well, just a really quick comment on that. I think that also, though, I even get creeped out by what my company knows about me. But I think that is very much the mind of a late 30-something-year-old woman, whereas I think that people in their 20s think it's totally normal. There was a great comic strip, I think it was in the New Yorker, and this father gives his son all of his old diaries to read, and so you see the son go off and read them, and he comes back to his dad. His dad's all proud and happy and says, "What do you think, son?" And the son goes, "Why would you read a blog that why would you write a blog that no one else could read?" And so I think just the idea that, again, our lens of privacy and comfort, I think is very different than young people who are willing to sacrifice that to get exactly what they want when they want it.
Yeah, I have a program with our local high school, which is, I guess, 16 to 18-year-old kids that intern for me, and they're completely comfortable with that. So it's a very good point.
Sanja, why don't you talk a little bit about how the work you create, even the lectures you provide, connect with this kind of new consumer?
Yeah, so I also teach at Columbia Business School, and with it comes a certain set of responsibilities for educating a new set of clients. I always think about how can I make my job easier by giving them the tools so that they come back and A, buy good work, and B, understand the limitations and the opportunities of this new world. And to answer the question about the omni-channel consumer, and it touches upon the data, is that there's this understanding that, of course, there's all this data out there, and it's immensely important and useful. And we should marketers should make strategic decisions based on that data that's current. And nobody disputes that, yet I work on a portfolio of 12 plus brands on any given day. They're all Fortune 100 companies, all very successful in their own right, and I can tell you that they are not using that data to inform consumer insights. And that's not to say that they're doing a bad job. I think most marketers have a very difficult time deciphering useful signals from myriad of data sources that they're now being plugged into. And that presents an opportunity for partners like us. A lot of folks in the audience are on the agency side to really point out what's the useful stuff from that's just a stream of data you're plugging yourself into, and maybe once in a blue moon you'll get something useful out of it. To give an example, most CPG clients that I work with, they do their brand building way where everything's based on a consumer insight that's maybe touched up every 3 years, and it's usually something that I would politely classify as a human truth. So something like she's a mom and her family's more important to her than anything else. Yeah. And therefore, let's build a brand that taps into this audience, which is a mom, for whom family is important. Okay, that's enough? Maybe these days, not really. And when we talk about consumer insights that are relevant, that you're getting from the data signals, we at 360, I talk about Game of Thrones, the work that we've done in partnership with HBO, where instead of building a campaign, let's say, that is meant to promote Game of Thrones right before the season, that's based on an insight that's something like, this is a gamer that also enjoys stories about mysticism, which is an easier way to do it. We instead used cookie data, social listening data to identify the fan passion points that we could tap into. So while there's lots of conversations about that show this was for season 4, right before season 4, everybody was hating on King Joffrey, right? So that was a shared theme among all the fans of the audience. That's a consumer insight that you can build creative around. And that's something that is relevant in the moment, can be broadcast in earned channels, very little paid media, and has resonance. And I think that gets back to Jawbone is successful, and I can understand why everybody wants to work with you, is because you're tapped into a passionate audience. And I think that's the way we use data in a meaningful way, but it's also a way that requires you to stay on top of your game every 6 or so months.
I'd love to piggyback on that point, and I'll let you transition to the next question, Piers. But one of the things that has been so fascinating to me in kind of the course of my career is coming from the kind of culture creator world, the downtown New York City kid that, I transitioned into advertising and thought advertising was nothing but culture vultures. So I had an issue with advertising because I thought they just stole stuff from the streets.
Yeah.
Then when I got into advertising, I thought the power of what we can create in culture is amazing and immensely important if we recognize that. Then you go to the client side, and the biggest difference between the power that I thought we had as an agency and the client side is how little the client side business thinks about the agency conversations. Mm-hmm. The way that it has been to date, having worked on, to your point, I had 30 brands in my portfolio, and you guys worked on a lot of them. But the way that this classically trained type A brand person looks at the agency world is like recess for your day. That's what it is. It's the fun part of your day, and you get back to work.
Yeah.
But the concern is if you believe that that's recess, how serious can that conversation really be with all the data that is discussed in that moment?
Yeah.
And how many agency folk talk to the folk that actually, because there's 2 sets of data. Yeah. There's consumer data and there's commercial data.
Yep.
And how do you bridge the gap between the consumer data and the commercial data? Because I will talk about consumer intent, but I get paid on, what people buy.
That's great. I mean, it brings me on to a point, another point about, I see 2 kind of themes happening within the marketing departments, the relationship between marketers and agencies. One is I see marketers and people who work on client side looking more for production agencies or people who can create more than strategy is one thing I think I see happening. A second thing is I see how marketers are blurring back again into sales, and there's definitely a drive towards making things count, shifting product, and I think maybe that might leave advertising type agencies behind in some ways. I don't know whether you have any comment about that observation. Counter me, tell me I'm wrong.
That's a good point, and also on what you just mentioned before, which is there's there's that data and how do you make sense of it all. Like we work with a client called TuneIn, who's a radio station aggregator, and I think they have over 80,000 radio stations, if I'm not mistaken, in their database, and you can imagine how many fields exist in their database for those 80,000 stations. So we go in and try to help them make sense of it, so that the algorithms that are run against those data fields are actually as accurate and as editorial as possible to help out. But on your point, absolutely, we were talking a little bit about this out, and you take the word content away from marketing, it's just marketing again, right? So what is the purpose of marketing, and what is the scope, and what is the call to action for a marketing service? Right now, there's a lot of blurred lines, but I do think it's pushing back towards sales, absolutely.
Pushing back into
Totally
sales,
agree.
yeah.
I think definitely in the partnership marketing world, that has become a lot of what I'm working on lately. So we had a recent launch where we released new colors and designs of the Up Band. This is gunmetal, if anyone's interested.
Very nice.
Sales in content marketing.
Exactly.
And so going into that launch again, because we're in such a crowded space, ended up doing a launch event where we brought in OPI, the nail polish company, and they actually matched all of the colors of the bands to colors of their nail polish. They came up with nail art that was thematically themed after the bands. Then we also brought in Bobble Bar, who is, if anyone's not aware of the company, you should. It's an awesome jewelry company. It's basically Zara, but think jewelry, so fast fashion, fast jewelry kind of turnaround. And so moving on with those relationships, a couple of weeks ago, we actually launched a product collaboration with Bobble Bar, where they actually built a bracelet to hold one of our smaller trackers. And, honestly, as part of that launch, and it has done really, really well for them. So within less than 24 hours, they sold out of 3 of 6 SKUs. In less than 3 days, they sold out of 4 of 6 SKUs and have a wait list going. And honestly, some women might buy one of our trackers to throw in there, some might not. But at least on all the marketing that went out about it, on every single product page where it's selling out, our product is talked about. And so, yes, in that relationship, because I try to stay kind of current in terms of what's going on, my own interests, what the kids are up to, there wasn't really a role for an agency in that, because you have Bobble Bar that shoots all their own photography in-house, does all their own emails in-house, builds their website. I didn't need someone to bring the relationship to me, and so I've had wonderful agency relationships, but I do agree that I think specifically partners have opened up possibilities in terms of expanding the audience. I think getting to that same kind of social content, we're trying to be omni-channel without having to have had an agency create that.
Sanja, defend.
But I love Sonja's work.
Let's talk about from an agency point of view, how are things changing? How's your role changing in a relationship with clients?
Yeah, so I would say, I would agree with you that more and more clients are less interested in AOR-like relationships. And I think that's a reflection of how competitive our industry has gotten, and that there are new entrants to it, right? So 5-6 years ago, we could say Facebook was an advertising agency's partner. I would say Facebook is now the client's partner. Facebook has a studio, they create their own content. They oftentimes respond to the RFPs themselves. Media entities that are up-and-comers like Vice compete for the same assignments that we might be competing for when it comes to content creation. So I would say because marketing has been disrupted, there are a lot more players now, which means an advertising agency is competing with a whole new set of players. But there are also great opportunities there. So I don't know if anybody's here from Wonderman, but they recently created this job, head of content. And I think it's a very smart move for them, because if you're Wonderman, you're sitting on a hefty pile of media dollars that are associated with your clients. And if you're smart, you will be strategically aligned enough with your clients, know their business objectives, know what they want to accomplish, that you can serve up on a silver platter without any additional contracts, a solution to a content problem. And so I think the real opportunity here is for media agencies who have these large holding company-esque like budgets to develop compelling content, either in partnership with the like of Facebook or Vice, or in-house studios. And I feel like that's something it's very early stages for that, but I think if you're a strategic business leader in this industry, you're probably keeping an eye out for what that means for our own profit margins and just long-term profitability.
Okay. So we've been talking about kind of high level and some of the themes that are happening to the marketers' brands who are influencing the use of technology. Maybe we can talk about how does that then manifest in terms of the use of technology. I mean, people must come to you when you think about a sports team and go, well, you can do all this great stuff. Everyone's got VR and everything else. Right. What goes through your mind when you think, okay, I'm going to now explore the use of tech?
Right. There's the terminology, there's fast and slow culture. There's fast tech and slow tech. And I don't know if you were still around with us when we were doing that Disney project or not.
The wristband.
The X band. So we worked on this magic band for Disney earlier on in their career for Mr. Iger. And one of the biggest issues was what kind of technology to use to try to solve this human problem, which is they don't know how to manage or control their audience once they walk through those doors of that Disney theme park, nor do they track any of the behaviors and movements. So that, practical issue, you can book your flight a year in advance to go to Disney World. You can figure out what seat on the plane you want. You can figure out what room in the hotel you want, yet you can't figure out what ride and what time to be in the small world. Mm-hmm. And you're queuing for days. And that creates a horrible situation for them. But they don't want to tier the experience like Vegas does. It should look democratic, which means there should be a ton of back-end data to make that happen. There should be a conduit to have the parents or the people control that magic. Now, their issue was how to do that
Controlling the
consistently.
magic, is
Yeah,
it?
that was the brief. That was the summary.
Okay.
There you go. Parents controlling the magic, not Disney.
Comes through.
Data can do that. But the question really broke down to what kind of technology device or platform do you use to transact and transition it? And it became something as simple as RFID. Right, because you can't have radically new technology the way that they were pitched. They pitched a ton of new ideas like VR and augmented reality and the whole nine. But imagine getting 55 million people to, kind of engage in that. And then what do you do when you have to optimize that? How expensive is it to actually continue that process? I look at our arena as like mini Disney World. I'll give you that story to say, we have a controlled environment, which is what Disney had. We have core followers and some kind of folks passing through. And the beauty of having a controlled environment is that you can create a lot of magical things if you allow the devices to speak to one another, which is all RFID is. It's antennas and data.
Yeah.
So if you find a way to do that and do it at scale and do it in such a way that you don't have to continually maintenance it, which is what cutting edge technology does, it gets obsolete fast. That's the whole point of it. How do you create an experience that is ownable, can transition over time like a roller coaster, right? But can constantly be personalized in tons of unique ways through the back-end data that you never see, but the experience is amazing and different each time that you engage it. That's the fascinating part of technology to me, is the digital, the seen and the unseen, and the live experience. I love the way that can actually create new experiences for people, and not just a virtual experience. Because we need a real with that virtual to make, to me, the best experience possible.
It's very interesting. Emily, we talked about the fact you have 1 foot in Silicon Valley, 1 foot here. And obviously, there's a lot of tech comes out of that. Does that influence kind of the world view or the marketing view?
I definitely feel that I'm a better marketer for living in New York. No offense to anyone that lives in Silicon Valley. I spent the first year that I was with Zynga, I lived in the Bay, and it was great. And I lived in the Bay. Most video game publishers are oddly located in the Bay. But I find that what happened, particularly when I went to Zynga and became more of like the Silicon Valley kind of startup world, is that we're really obsessed with ourselves and truly do think that Silicon Valley is like the center of the universe. So that comes to life, for example, at Jawbone when we started doing brand awareness studies and category awareness studies. And people internally were just shocked that our brand awareness was so low. I'm like, yeah, because you asked your buddies over, at GoPro, and you asked your buddies over at Twitter. Of course they all, San Francisco and New York are very heavy with our product. And so I do feel like there is a weird thing that happens in Silicon Valley where it is so startup and so convenient, and that it's very easy to forget that the rest of the world is not like that. Even New York is not like that. And so I think living in New York, and honestly I feel a lot more inspired here. I feel like there's a lot more, just for me, even walking to work and walking by the Supreme store and seeing okay, what are you kids lining up for today? But having those kind of influences, I think, just keeps us grounded. And so even, for example, the partnership with OPI, that was definitely something, because Jawbone is a very male-heavy company that people are like, oh, that's cute. That's weird. Okay, fine, you can go play with nail polish. But it ended up doing really well for us, and we're looking at retail partnerships around it. And I definitely think that is something that for me was just, being able to be exposed to other things in New York and not, immediately going to what is another, technology thing that we can work with, here in the Bay.
Sanja, it'd be interesting to think about kind of the influence of kind of Bay Area in terms of must do this, must have something on the phone. And then, Daniel's sort of comments about slow tech versus fast tech, and then the recommendations you provide your clients.
So the way I look at it is it really depends what type of brand you are. Are you a CPG brand? Are you fighting for shelf space? Is proximity important to you? That dictates a whole set of recommendations versus we also work on Spotify, for example. Are you a tech brand? Is your audience super savvy? Where is your consumer spending most of the time with? So I think category and who you're targeting determine more the options and the recommendations we make rather than what's the hottest thing coming out of Silicon Valley. I work on a lot of CPG brands, so what I get passionate about, these days, I'm putting my bets on Link NYC because I think it's a really cool way to take over all the phone booths in New York City. You know, they're going to provide Wi-Fi. There's a digital out-of-home component. Is that the most revolutionary thing on the market right now? No, it's not. Is it right for a CPG brand that's, you know, starved for shelf space, needs proximity, needs reminders next to Walgreens? Yes. Do I think it could be a good fit for Diageo? Probably. There's lots of sort of tie-ins. Who's the consumer? What's the business challenge at hand? I think, you know, that's a better filter rather than like what's the hottest thing out there, in my humble opinion.
Sure. I'm going to steal that idea there. Use
Go
all the
ahead.
telephone booths with
Well, and it's
Wi-Fi.
interesting because
It's
something
gonna
that
have
even is happening with
issues happening.
VCs in Silicon Valley is that they're actually taking their portfolio startup companies and organizing days for CPG companies where literally they just parade a bunch of their portfolio companies in front of these big CPG companies because they're looking for what is the next hottest thing, how do we attach ourselves to something. And I don't know that anything truly productive comes out of that versus it coming from a feeling of
think these,
how do we attach to something cool.
Do you think these labs work? You know, everyone's got a lab in their area and they're all like investing in tech. Is that an important strategy?
You know, I think that the lab thing is interesting because it feels like it's speeding up again now, but I feel like there was a time when, like, you know, everyone's opening a lab in San Francisco, but I don't feel like I ever see the end result. I'm like, I hear that you open the lab, but then I feel like we never truly hear what has come out of that lab.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to. It's top
It's
secret.
that secret.
I'd echo that, but what I would add is, and I have no data to support this, but I do think it's important. Lots of, you know, Fortune 500 clients, the issues are organizational, right? It's the mindset. It's the fact that brand management hasn't changed structurally for 40 years. It's the fact that everybody's operating off an org chart that looks like a Christmas tree. So if a lab in the Bay Area is helpful to like at least get the conversations going around what's the right organizational structure. Can we revisit our relic measurements of like working versus not working media? You know, if it can do something to sort of open up those conversations, then I would say it's probably a good investment, even if you don't come out with tangible products or innovations to the product.
Yeah, even if it just influences the dialogue, that's a good point. You know?
And I think people like American Express, they have been successful in kind of, I think, ingraining themselves to a bit in Silicon Valley. So whether it was, you know, their partnership with Uber, being able to purchase on Twitter, you know, we have a band that works with American Express, they seem to like bring things to market, but do agree that, yeah, the dialogue is helpful, but also impressive.
That's great.
Things, yeah.
So we have about 5 minutes left. Because I've got hundreds of questions I could ask you, but I don't know whether I'll open up to the floor and see if anybody else would like to ask a question to across the panel or to a particular member. This is the deadly silence. Yeah. Let's talk about a theme that I'm also thinking about a lot is experience versus ownership is a big trend. I know this. I'm off topic. We didn't discuss this on the phone. I know. But you know, now I'm here. I'm like, I'm going to pick your brain. Experience versus ownership is really interesting for me. It's very important for like car brands. Okay, people rather sit in the back of an Uber than own a car. Even with technology, you know, I've spoken to technology companies where, you know, like, kids don't like the shiny stuff, and they're not using it as status symbols and stuff like that. Yeah. Is that really something that's happening, and how does that impact kind of marketers and brand innovators and stuff?
For sure. Well, to your point about status, I mean, if you grew up in the Z or, you know, millennial generation, status is what you've done. It's not what you own. So inherently, when they hear the word status, they think about an update on Facebook, not a Scotch whiskey, right? So it's a completely reframing what that word means in culture. But yeah, I mean, a practical example, very small example of at our arena, the age-old model in sports is to have season tickets. When you have StubHub and all these companies that resell tickets and you have reselling price because it becomes inventory, like real estate, that you can hopefully resell at a higher value at some point down the line. So most people get season tickets. Back to experience. The assumption is that the only thing you want, the only experience you want is a seat in an arena whenever you want it. That's a flawed model. Because you sell seats. You actually don't sell seats. You sell, honestly, what I sell is media. I don't actually sell a hockey game. Like, to me, the hockey game is like a TV show on ABC. right? It's just there between the commercials. Right. So I'm actually running a media company that is attached to a physical location that has an event tonight, Seton Hall, or the next night. Like last night was this guy Abel, or right, the weekend was there last night. Week before that, a hockey game. So to me, I'm actually packing it with content or programming to sell media attached to those eyeballs that come for that programming. If you reframe the way you think about it, the experience is what's going to get people there, not the seat for the hockey game. So a practical example is the shift is no season tickets. We're selling flex memberships, which is actually a very Amex-like model. I'm just selling credit.
Yeah.
A season ticket costs X amount of dollars. Well, I'll give you that same amount of dollars, and you can use it however you want. Just give me $2,500. You can buy $2,500 worth of food. You can buy nosebleed seats and just pig out, on the drinks or the food. But you can flex your experience, and that to me is a fascinating opportunity.
Paul, do you think that's kind of why there's such a fascination with content and experience?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I'm constantly reading, because I deal with a lot of music clients, and video clients as well. And in the entertainment industry, I've been working with it for a while. And just, I think the audience, the consumer is just very comfortable with not having to own things all the time. And I think we're now moving into a culture where people are just very comfortable. I think I just read somewhere that Warner Brothers, I think now over half of its revenue comes from streaming and not from physical products. So I think we're just moving towards that. And I think the consumer is becoming more and more comfortable with
I've made a connection. Maybe marketers are trying to sell more stuff because no one's buying anything. Yeah. Emily,
that's where the partnerships are really. Yeah. That's where the partnerships are extremely.
Emily, just you work for a company that sells stuff. Talk a little bit about the experience, the importance of experience.
Yeah, our product is one of those. It's challenging because people definitely research, in the category, but our product, and I think even the way we tend to talk about it sometimes, it's really kind of someone really does have to live with it to understand how much better it gets and just things that happen over even just the course of a week. But that's really hard to explain to people.
So how do you get them into that kind of
it's challenging, and so something that we're trying to spend more time doing now is thinking about content and how do we start, and this is kind of no shit Sherlock stuff, so this is not meant to be a brilliant marketing idea, but even surfacing user stories. So having someone really making sure that we are taking people from all sorts of different walks of life and having them tell their story about, whatever their aha moment was with the product, and those sorts of, things. And again, because I think there was a time where we tried to, very visually tell people, this is what it looks like. But again, whether you're a new mother or whether you're just starting college, people's sleep patterns are different, their activity levels are different. So having users tell those stories helps.
Sanja, do you have any comments about the experience versus ownership and the impact on how you approach customers?
Nothing other than the fact that it's definitely true. And I think it's only going to become more true as time passes on, because the initial wave of consumers were dealing with millennials who are now as old as 32. So I feel like it's only going to get worse. And I think that's where content plays a huge consumer experience.
And technology as well.
Yeah, I like to tell my clients, you need to think about content as a product, not as a campaign. That's an important phrase that I just keep repeating. Hopefully somebody will.
That's great.
It's product, not a campaign. And really the new battleground for loyalty is customer experience.
Yeah, the engagement and the experience. Yeah.
Well, and to end that point, even the term campaign is a random term because it has nothing to do with the consumer. It's to do with your competition. It's a war term.
Totally.
I'm beating someone. Well, who? The competition. What about the consumer? Can you talk about them? So what is the language we use to talk about how we develop ideas for consumers to enjoy their lives and our products more? Because the campaign is not a term that I even want to use anymore. I don't. And I don't use the term budget anymore. It should be a Silicon Valley term, an investment. Because a budget is a grown-up allowance. So when you have a budget, you can spend it. Well, you're just spending my money. That makes no sense. You should invest my money and figure out how I'm going to return my investment. And if the marketer doesn't know how to do that, then why do they get the budget?
Yep. Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Lovely. Well, as I said, I wanted to kind of create a panel that looked at a higher level and helped us think about how do we use all this cool stuff, these cool gadgets, cool tech, and actually apply it in a strategic way. So thank you, Daniel, Emily, Paul, Sanja. I really appreciate it. Let's give them a round of applause.